pre-dawn rays were barely touching the summit of El Capitan when James Corwin, a 37-year-old mountaineer from Colorado, began his ascent on April 23, 2001. Stacked against the ranger station wall were bags of supplies, an SUV with Colorado license plates parked carelessly nearby, and a logbook with the last entry, Solo, East Route, return to sunset. 9 years later, his embalmed head would be found in a remote cave in the national park, perfectly preserved, eyes open, as if watching anyone who disturbed its rest. Mountaineering experts considered El Capitan's eastern route difficult but passable for the experienced climber. Corwin, with 15 years of experience climbing throughout North America and 2 expeditions to the Himalayas, was certainly in the professional category. The logbook of his GPS unit, found in the car, showed that he had made 4 preparatory climbs on less difficult routes in the previous 2 weeks, acclimatizing and learning the local rock features. James was methodical to the point of pedantry, his wife Elizabeth later recalled in an interview for the Yosemite Gazette. Every climb was planned to the minute, every gram of gear checked off. He never allowed for accidents. Ranger Thomas Wilcox discovered Corwin's abandoned gear the next morning: a backpack with a supply of water, a sleeping bag, and a camera with one last photo: a strange shadow near the top crevice of the cliff. The photo, later scrutinized by FBI experts, was inconclusive. The fuzzy silhouette captured at the edge of the lens sharpness could have been either another person or a play of light in the rock formations. It was unusually hot for April that morning, Wilcox told the investigating committee. The thermometer was showing 86 degrees Fahrenheit as early as 6 o'clock in the morning. Visibility was perfect, not a cloud in sight. I noticed the backpack as I made my usual morning rounds. It was lying neatly, didn't look abandoned in a panic. A search operation unfolded around the entire perimeter of the national park within 2 hours of Wilcox's signal. 3 National Guard helicopters, 15 cinematologists with dogs, and 123 local and tourist volunteers. A temporary headquarters deployed in a parking lot at the foot of El Capitan coordinated the effort. Meteorological conditions were favorable to the search: cloudless skies, minimal turbulence, and temperatures that allowed thermal imaging cameras to work at maximum efficiency. "We were combing every square foot of available terrain," recalled Roy Bennett, the park's search and rescue team leader. "It felt like the man had just vanished into thin air." The only significant find was a piece of safety rope 200 meters above the point where the climb began. Laboratory analysis showed that the rope had not been cut or frayed. It broke during a sharp jerk, exceeding its design strength by at least 3 times. Experts on climbing equipment called such a break virtually impossible under normal climbing conditions. Elizabeth Corwin arrived in Yosemite the day after the search began. A slender woman with prematurely graying hair and the keen eye of a biologist, she had worked at a research lab at the University of Colorado for the past 6 years. Her appearance added a new dimension to the operation, a fragile but unyielding determination to find her husband at any cost. "James knew these mountains like the back of his hand," she declared to reporters gathered outside the temporary search headquarters. "It's not an accident. Someone took him. I can feel it with every cell in my body." Local police, led by Chief Robert Haley, initially categorized the disappearance as a climbing accident. Haley, a 52-year veteran police officer with a graying beard and deep wrinkles from constant exposure to the sun, was himself a keen mountaineer in his youth and personally knew 3 climbers who had died in Yosemite over the past 20 years. "Mountains don't forgive mistakes," was his standard phrase in briefings. Even the most experienced climbers sometimes lose concentration for a split second. That's enough. As the investigation progressed, however, his confidence began to wane. The first red flag was James's journal entries found in his SUV. For the past 3 months, his notes had become increasingly bizarre, filled with references to watchers from on high and ancient rock keepers. In between descriptions of the technical aspects of preparing for the climb were paragraphs written in almost feverish handwriting. "Saw them again today. They are watching from the upper ledges. The locals think it's a play of light, but I know there are eyes there. Trail mist showed me the signs. They use the stones for messages. 3,000 years of the same messages, and were too blind to read." Haley, reviewing these notes in his office late one evening after the 4th day of the search, felt a chill run down his spine. As an experienced police officer, he had learned to trust his intuition, and it screamed that there was more to this case than just another mountain accident. In the small room of the Pine Cone Motel, where Corwin had stayed before the climb, investigators had discovered a carefully concealed cache under a floor panel that had come loose. The contents were baffling: ancient Native American artifacts, arrowheads, ritual masks, amulets made of animal bones, and manuscripts about rituals to worship mountain spirits. Some documents looked like copies of museum pieces, others like original notes from Corwin himself, scrawled with symbols resembling petroglyphs. "My husband was an amateur anthropologist," Elizabeth explained under questioning. "For the past year, he had been intensively studying the culture of the local Indian tribes. It was his way of gaining a deeper understanding of the places he was climbing." An ethnographer from Stanford University, invited to consult, had a different opinion. "These materials go far beyond the usual amateur interest. Some of the documents contain information about rituals that have been considered lost for centuries. Sources of this level of detail are extremely rare, even in an academic environment." On the 7th day of the search, the helicopters were withdrawn and the number of search teams was reduced to 4. On the 10th day, the official operation was scrapped. "Under the circumstances, the chances of finding Mr. Corwin alive are virtually non-existent," read an official statement from the park administration. Elizabeth refused to leave Yosemite, renting a small house on the outskirts of the nearest town and going into the park daily with a small group of volunteers. Her persistence elicited mixed reactions from locals. Some admired her dedication, while others whispered of an urban lunatic unable to accept the obvious. Haley, against the DA's recommendations, did not close the case, relegating it to the active investigation category. In the evenings, after his main job, he returned to the folder labeled Corwin, rereading witness statements, studying photographs and maps of the area. "Something doesn't add up here, Marge," he would say to his secretary, the only person with whom he shared his doubts. "A man can't disappear without a trace in a national park, especially with such a massive search operation." A month after the disappearance, as media attention turned to other events, Haley received an anonymous note left on the windshield of his car. "Corwin is neither the first nor the last. Mountains require sacrifice. Don't dig deeper unless you're prepared to become one." Handwriting analysis was inconclusive, and no prints were found on the paper. The note was officially categorized as an unreliable threat, possibly from a mentally unstable person. But Haley, looking at those words, couldn't shake the feeling that the mountains of Yosemite held a far worse secret than anyone realized. a secret that James Corwin may have paid the ultimate price to uncover. 9 years later, those suspicions would be confirmed in the most horrific way possible. In the meantime, the secret remained buried in the silent cliffs of Yosemite National Park, where time flows differently and ancient forces may have never truly fallen asleep. Friends, if you like this investigative story, please support the channel, subscribe, leave a comment, and put a like. It's not just a formality. YouTube's algorithms really help promote videos that get an active response from viewers. Your support will let more people know about this amazing and disturbing case. Now, let's continue our dive into the mysteries of Yosemite. September 18th, 2010. The temperature is 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Light cloud cover, visibility is excellent. The meteorological conditions are ideal for a geological expedition organized by the Department of Earth Sciences of the University of California at Berkeley. The group of 7 students, led by Professor Warren Stevens, received official permission to explore a little-studied cave complex in the eastern part of Yosemite National Park. It was a standard educational field trip, Stevens later recalled, nervously adjusting his titanium alloy-framed glasses. "We do field trips like this every semester. No one could have guessed that a normal school day would turn into this." Amanda Jenkins, a 22-year-old second-year graduate student, was majoring in speleology, the science of caves. A petite girl with dark red hair braided into a practical braid, she was renowned for her ability to squeeze through narrow passages inaccessible to most explorers. She already owned 3 discoveries of new cave galleries in various Sierra Nevada systems. "Amanda was our secret weapon," her fellow student Jessica Lee recounted. "If anyone could find something new, it was her." At 11 hours and 23 minutes, Jenkins found a vertical crevice about 40 centimeters wide, partially concealed by a stalagmite column at the north end of the main hall of the cave being explored. Attaching a handheld camera to her jumpsuit, she began her descent, transmitting live video to a monitor set up at the group's base camp. "It looked standard at first," Professor Stevens commented, reviewing the footage during her testimony. "A typical vertical well of karst origin, a spiral descent with micro-terraces. But at a depth of approximately 30 meters, the nature of the rock changed dramatically." The video, subsequently attached to case number YS 2010-237, recorded the moment when Jenkins reached the horizontal passage, and her flashlight revealed an unusual picture from the darkness. A perfectly flat circle about 3 meters in diameter, made of flat stones on the floor of the cave hall. In the center of the circle was an elevation resembling an altar. "There's something strange here." Her voice, recorded by the camera's microphone, sounded muffled due to the acoustic features of the cave. "It's clearly a man-made structure, possibly an ancient sanctuary of the local tribes. I'm approaching for a detailed inspection." The frantic scream that followed 17 seconds later echoed throughout the cave system, distorting and repeating repeatedly, becoming a sonic corridor of terror. The cameraman controlling the transmission at base camp instinctively recoiled from the monitor as the camera showed a close-up of the object on the altar. A human head. Caucasoid male, approximately 30 to 40 years old, dark hair with graying at the temples, 3-day stubble. Eyes open, pupils dilated, expression frozen, with a tinge of surprise or shock. But most disturbing of all was the state of her head. It looked as if the separation from the body had occurred hours, perhaps days, but in no way years ago. "I thought we were dealing with a very recent homicide," Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, the first police officer to arrive on the scene, later admitted. My first instructions to the team were to preserve any traces the perpetrator may have left behind when he left the scene just hours ago. An emergency investigation team formed and arrived on the scene 2 hours and 47 minutes after the discovery. The team included forensic scientist Richard Klein, a specialist with 25 years of experience with the California Bureau of Criminalistics. "I have seen a lot of things in my career," Klein noted in the official report, "but the condition of the object baffled me. The initial examination defied the logic of the timeline of post-mortem changes. The head looked shockingly fresh. The skin retained its natural hue, with no signs of the typical cadaveric discoloration. The hair seemed moist and supple. The cut line on the neck remained clean, without the tissue corrosion characteristic of old wounds, as if the decapitation had occurred in the near future. A sophisticated embalming technique was used," Klein concluded after a 6-hour examination directly at the scene of the discovery. "Preliminarily, I can say that a unique composition was used, possibly incorporating local minerals and plant extracts. This would explain the lack of decomposition and the illusion of freshness. The preservation technique is unknown to modern forensic medicine." The altar on which the head was located was a cylindrical structure about 80 centimeters high, made of flat stones without the use of binding mortar. The surface of the stones was covered with strange symbols, a complex ligature of lines, spirals, and geometric figures scratched out with a sharp tool. "The symbolism does not match known patterns of petroglyphs of local tribes," noted Paul Whitehead, a visiting anthropology consultant. "Some elements resemble Miwok writing, but most of the signs represent a unique system not previously recorded." After securing the initial find, the investigation team, supplemented by speleologists from the National Park Service, began a systematic survey of the cave complex. 30 meters from the first room, behind a series of narrow passageways, a second, much larger room with a domed ceiling about 10 meters high was discovered. Sergeant Rodriguez, the first to enter this room, later admitted that he was forced to leave the room and pant for a few minutes before he could continue his work. What the investigator saw was described by one of the team members as a life-size gallery of death. Human heads were arranged around the perimeter of the room on stone ledges resembling theater boxes. 10 heads, each on a separate pedestal, each embalmed in the same mysterious way as the first discovery. They were arranged in a circle, as if silent observers, facing the center of the room, where there was a depression resembling a primitive well. The placement of the heads was not random, forensic scientist Susan Park noted in her report. They were placed according to the sides of the world, forming a regular circle adjusted to the natural topography of the cave. This pattern suggests the ritual significance of the exposure. Over the next 48 hours, all recovered heads were removed from the scene for forensic examination and identification. Preliminary examination showed that all the objects belonged to men between the ages of 25 and 45, physically developed, with no pronounced pathologies other than the micro-trauma of the joints typical of mountaineers. DNA testing conducted at the FBI laboratory in Quantico confirmed the worst fears. One of the heads belonged to James Corwin, a mountaineer who had disappeared 9 years earlier. The others were identified as belonging to other missing hikers and climbers reported missing between 1984 and 2008. Most disturbing is the chronological pattern of the disappearances, noted FBI Special Agent Robert Morrison, who arrived on the third day of the investigation. The interval between cases ranges from 2 to 4 years, indicating a systematic, deliberate pattern of activity. Detective Layla Morgan, a 37-year-old ritual crime specialist with the San Francisco Police Department's Behavioral Analysis Unit, arrived on the scene the day after the discovery. A short woman with short-cropped dark hair and a piercing look in her gray eyes, Morgan had a reputation as a cultist hunter after successfully investigating a series of ritual murders in Northern California in 2007. These are not random killings, she concluded, after spending hours studying the symbols on the stones and methodically photographing each head from different angles. What we have in front of us is a systematic ritual practice that has existed for decades. The symbolism, the placement of objects, the choice of victims, everything points to a stable tradition with a fixed mythology and purpose. The strangest find discovered during further investigation of the cave complex was the personal belongings of the victims. Deep within the system, in a dry grotto with natural ventilation, the investigation team found carefully folded clothing of each victim. T-shirts, pants, socks, everything was neatly rolled up, labeled with strange symbols, and placed in niches carved into the cave wall. "It's like a storage room in a very strange hotel," one of the CSIs remarked offhandedly, for which he was reprimanded by the team leader for inappropriate humor. Among James Corwin's belongings was found his hiking diary, a small notebook in a worn leather cover. The last entry, dated the day he disappeared, read, "They are here, watching my every move. Today I will finally learn their true names. If I don't return, know this: I made this choice deliberately." This tape changes the context of the disappearance, noted Police Chief Robert Haley, graying and gaunt in the 9 years since the Corwin investigation began. It looks like he wasn't just going for a climb, he was on his way to a meeting. A meeting that turned him into a silent observer in a gallery of severed heads, where time seemed to stop and ancient horror took material form among the silent cliffs of Yosemite. Mariposa City Police Station, September 21st, 2010, 6 hours and 30 minutes in the morning. Robert Haley, now graying and wrinkled like the very rocks of Yosemite, enters the 6-digit code on the safe's panel. The metal door opens with a distinctive sound, revealing the contents, a dusty cardboard box with the faded inscription, Corwin. Notebooks, photographs, printouts of testimony, personal notes. 9 years of methodical work he continued in defiance of the official closing of the case. "I always knew he didn't just disappear," Haley says, neatly arranging the materials on his desk. The dim light of a desk lamp picks out photos of a smiling James Corwin and the rocky landscape of Yosemite from the semi-darkness of the office. "Mountains don't take people away without a trace. They leave clues." Detective Layla Morgan, a San Francisco ritual crime specialist, methodically goes through the materials. Her slender fingers, with short-cropped fingernails, flip through pages of reports, and her gaze fixes on details that have escaped the attention of previous investigators. "Have you noticed this pattern before?" she asks, laying out in front of Haley a chronological table of disappearances in the national park area over the past 30 years. Every 4 or 5 years, always in the off-season, late spring or early fall, always experienced climbers, always men between the ages of 25 and 45. Haley nods slowly, his gaze resting on the interests column. Opposite each name is labeled local history, anthropology, Indian culture. I recorded individual cases, he admits, but without bodies, without direct evidence. It looked like speculation. And now we have heads, Morgan completes his thought. 11 heads that fit this time pattern perfectly. James Corwin's widow, Elizabeth, arrived in Mariposa on the first flight from Denver. A 45-year-old woman with prematurely graying hair, gathered into a severe bundle, sits in the interrogation room, nervously clutching a cup of coffee. On the table in front of her is a photograph of her husband, taken the day before he disappeared. Mrs. Corwin, Morgan begins softly, tell us about his interest in the local culture. Elizabeth stares into the cup for a long moment, as if trying to find answers in the dark surface of the liquid. When she finally looks up, her eyes are filled with a mixture of fear and relief. James was possessed for months, she says in a quiet but firm voice. It all started after he climbed Half Dome in 2000. He met an old man there who told him of a legend about the Guardians of the Heights, an ancient Native American cult that supposedly still practices sacrifices to entice the mountain spirits. As she tells her story, the air in the room seems to thicken. She describes how her husband immersed himself in research, how he gathered fragments of information from old books, archives, conversations with locals, how he gradually moved from scholarly interest to an almost religious awe. He believed that they preserved the heads of the victims as receptacles for their souls, she concludes her story. That through the right ritual, a person could become part of the mountains, gain immortality by merging with the stone. I thought it was just an exploratory passion. Now I'm not sure he was planning to return from that climb. Joseph Wilkinson, the archivist for the Mariposa Historical Society, 86-year-old Joseph Wilkinson, meets investigators in a storage room that smells of old paper and document preservatives. His aging hands gently arrange yellowed folders and photographs on a table. The Guardians have been legendary for centuries, he explains, putting on his archival gloves. But most historians thought they were just a myth, until the Phelps expedition in 1878. The photos, taken with a primitive camera nearly a century and a half ago, captured a group of 6 men in camping gear from that era. The caption on the back reads, Phelps Expedition Before Departure, Exploring the Northern Slopes, May 1878. They disappeared, Wilkinson continues, showing a newspaper clipping with the headline, Expedition Missing in the Horns. All but one, William Burroughs, the group's photographer. He was found 2 weeks later, wandering through the woods in a state of extreme mental distress. Barrow's medical records from Stockton Psychiatric Hospital record his condition. Patient suffers from regular panic attacks. In moments of lucidity, speaks constantly of men who have become stone and living heads speaking out of the darkness. Claims that his comrades were fed grief in pieces, leaving their heads for the last communion. Burroughs spent 23 years in the asylum before his death in 1901. His last words, recorded by the nurse on duty, "They are coming for me. I can hear their footsteps on the stone. At last, I will rest in peace." Layla Morgan spends hours studying the symbols found on the altar and walls of the cave. She compares them to known patterns of petroglyphs of local tribes, to ancient writings, to the occult symbolism of various cults. There's a system here, she explains to Haley, pointing out the repeating elements. These aren't random drawings, it's a language. Anthropology professor David Eichhorn of Stanford University, an expert on Native American ritual practices, arrives in Mariposa on the fourth day of the investigation. A tall man with a neatly trimmed beard and an attentive gaze behind the panes of his horn-rimmed glasses. He spends hours studying photographs of the symbols, comparing them with material from his archives. "This is incredible," he finally says, taking off his glasses and wiping his tired eyes. "I've only seen symbols like this once before, in an 18th century manuscript describing the secret practices of mountain shamans of the Miwok tribe. The manuscript was considered a hoax because of the rituals it described, which were too complex for the technological level of the time." Eichhorn points to specific symbols associated with the ancient rite of passage, where the victim is gradually fed to the mountain, leaving the head for the final rite, perfectly preserved using a secret embalming technique known only to the initiated. According to the manuscript, the sacrifice must be voluntary, the professor explains. The candidate undergoes a series of tests to prove his or her determination to become part of the mountain. The final ritual involves separating the head, which is preserved with a special composition of minerals, herbs, and human fluids. As the investigation progresses, Haley and Morgan are confronted with a disturbing fact. Witnesses who can shed light on the case are systematically disappearing. A local guide who mentioned in 2003 about strange nocturnal gatherings in the northern part of the park left the region a week after testifying. His current whereabouts are unknown. The caretaker of the southern sector of the park, who in 2007 reported ritual paraphernalia found on the Mist Trail, died under unclear circumstances when his body was found at the foot of a cliff. The official cause of death was a climbing accident. 3 locals who had previous contact with Haley in the Corwin case recanted their testimony, claiming they misunderstood the situation or exaggerated under stress. "This isn't just a series of murders," Morgan concludes, analyzing the information he's received. "This is an organization with history, structure, and influence." Upon re-examining James Corwin's personal effects stored in the cave, the forensics team discovers a cache in the lining of his backpack. Inside is a folded map of the Yosemite area with marked dots corresponding to where other climbers have disappeared. The map is modeled with strange symbols that partially match those found in the cave. In the top corner is an inscription in Corwin's hand. "They choose those who seek them, but to find them is to become one of them." "He wasn't a random victim," Haley says quietly, looking at the map. "He was looking for them, and it looks like he found them." The shadows of the past, hidden in the mountain folds of Yosemite, are slowly taking shape, ancient, dark, and far more real than anyone realized. And an investigation that began with the discovery of a single head becomes a journey to the heart of a cult that has existed for centuries, feeding on the blood of those who have gotten too close to its secrets. September 24th, 2010, Mariposa Police Department, 2 hours and 15 minutes past midnight. In the dim light of a desk lamp, Detective Layla Morgan reviews archival surveillance footage from the Pine Cone Motel, where James Corwin spent his last night before the climb. The multiple magnified image is grainy. The timestamp in the corner of the screen shows April 23rd, 2001 year, 23 hours and 17 minutes. "Stop!" Morgan freezes the frame, pitches forward. "Look, Haley." In the motel hallway, a man in a National Park Ranger uniform stands at the door of Corwin's room. His face is partially obscured by the visor of his cap, but his posture betrays a military bearing. The next 20 minutes of footage shows this man in Corwin's room. As he leaves, the camera captures James standing in the doorway, pale face, tense gaze. Back in the room, he's frantically writing something down in a notebook. "I checked the Park Service archives," Morgan continues, laying out the printouts in front of Haley. "No rangers were supposed to be in the area that night. No official visits to the motel guests are recorded." "So an unofficial visit?" Haley rubbed her sleep-inflamed eyes. "The question is whether this man was an actual ranger." The morning meeting of the investigative team is interrupted by the appearance of Assistant District Attorney Mark Jennings, a trim middle-aged man in an impeccable suit with perfectly styled hair and a cold, assessing gaze. "Gentlemen, ladies," Jennings glances around the audience, "I am forced to make adjustments to the investigation. As of this moment, access to the cave system where the artifacts were found is restricted by order of my office." The document he hands to Haley contains the official rationale: environmental safety considerations and respect for Native American sacred sites. It is signed by District Attorney Richard Thornton and stamped by the county executive's office. "This is going to seriously complicate the investigation," Haley calmly notes after studying the document. "We haven't finalized the evidence collection yet." "Major evidence has already been seized," Jennings parries. "The crime labs are working. Further intrusion into the cave system could disrupt the fragile ecosystem and trigger cave-ins. In addition," he pauses, "the Miwok Tribal Council of Elders has expressed concern about desecration of a sacred site." "Amazing," Morgan says quietly, not lifting his eyes from his notebook. "The Council of Elders hasn't reacted in any way for the last 9 years while we've been searching for the missing. Suddenly, there's such swiftness." Jennings ignores the barb. "Restrictions are effective immediately. Violators will be held accountable." There is a heavy silence in the room after he leaves. "I didn't realize there were so many environmentalists in the county," Haley finally utters, drumming her fingers on the table. "And that the DA's office cared so much about Native American spiritual values." That afternoon, David Willis, the caretaker of the local history museum, a short man in his 60s with disheveled gray hair and a wary eye, arrives at Haley's office without an appointment. He looks around nervously before pulling a thick brown paper envelope from a tattered briefcase. "I wasn't supposed to take this out of the museum," he explains in a whisper. "But after a visit from the DA's people yesterday, who seized some of our archives for digitization, I thought you should see it. Immediately." The photographs, dated 1870, were taken by one of the first explorers of the region, ethnographer Charles Henderson. They depict Miwok shamans performing a ritual around a stone altar, eerily similar to the one found in the cave with the heads of victims. One of the images clearly shows the ritual of embalming a severed head, a shaman applying a dark ointment from a bowl filled with herbs and minerals to a cut of the neck. Henderson disappeared a month after taking these photos, Willis explains. His assistant removed the photographic plates and diaries. The museum acquired the collection in 1927, but most of the material was never exhibited. It's too controversial. By 5 p.m., Haley receives a disturbing message. Elizabeth Corwin has failed to show up for a scheduled meeting with forensics. Officers dispatched to the motel where she's staying find an empty room with a neatly made bed. Personal belongings are in place. Only her purse and cell phone are missing. "She seemed scared yesterday," Morgan recalls, "especially when she handed me this." This was James Corwin's tattered leather-bound diary, which Elizabeth had kept hidden all these years. I was afraid they'd come after me too if they found out, was how she explained her silence. The diary contains shocking revelations, sketches of the ritual hall with heads, made long before James disappeared. Detailed descriptions of his infiltration into the secret society of the Guardians of the Heights, which, according to his notes, included influential locals, including park administration and law enforcement officials. Today I witnessed the preparation of the vessel, Corwin recorded on March 18, 2001. That's what they call the heads. Embalming is a process of amazing complexity. A mixture of 17 herbs, mineral salts, and human blood from previous guardians keeps the tissues in a near-living state. They believe that souls remain in their heads, watching the world through the glass eyes of the dead. Elder R claims he can hear their whispers. The final pages of the diary are devoted to Corwin's doubts about his mission. Having originally infiltrated the cult for research, he seems to have begun to take their beliefs seriously. What if they are right? What if the mountains really are alive and require sacrifice? I've seen the rocks part before the guardians. I've seen blocks of stone move for no apparent reason. Is there a line between science and magic in this world? The night of September 26th, Haley and Morgan, violating an express prohibition from the prosecutor's office, travel to a remote area of the park listed in Corwin's diary as the site of regular cult meetings. The coordinates lead them to a rock ledge that looks like a natural amphitheater. The moon illuminates the flat stone platform like a stage for an ancient play. Here, Morgan points to a barely visible crack in the rock wall. According to the diary, this is the entrance. The narrow passage, unnoticeable without precise directions, leads into a cave system unrelated to the one where the heads were discovered. The air inside is surprisingly fresh. Natural ventilation keeps the temperature comfortable for humans. They use this place regularly, Haley notes, pointing to the paths trampled in the soft soil. And, just recently, in the cave's main hall is evidence of recent ritual activity. On the walls is fresh blood, used to draw strange symbols. In niches are dozens of candles made of dark wax with herbal inclusions. The center of the room is occupied by a circle of 12 stone seats arranged around an altar with troughs for draining fluids. A side passage leads to a room set up like a primitive laboratory. Wooden shelves are stacked with glass containers of herbs, minerals, and liquids. A modern propane-powered refrigerator holds blood samples in labeled tubes. In the center is a stone table with a recess for the head and a chute system for draining fluids. They keep going, Morgan says quietly. All these years, right under the noses of the authorities. In the far corner of the lab, a metal safe is revealed. Breaking into it, the detectives find a folder of photographs, portraits of men labeled candidate. Among them are famous climbers, explorers, anthropologists who have visited the park in recent years. And the most recent photo is of Robert Haley, labeled Priority Target. Now I can see why the prosecutor's office was so concerned, Haley chuckles unfunnily. We got too close. Leaving the cave before dawn, the detectives make the spontaneous decision to change their return route, taking a longer but less obvious road. This saves their lives. Driving along the park's main road 3 hours later, they see the aftermath of an accident, a huge boulder blocking the highway exactly where they were supposed to pass, following the original plan. Amazing coincidence, Morgan remarks as he takes a photo of the scene. Especially considering that this area hasn't recorded a rockfall in the last 15 years. And especially considering, Haley adds, pointing to the base of the cliff where the boulder came off. That there are clearly visible signs of mechanical impact there. Someone really wanted us not to return from our nighttime adventure. Back in town, the detectives realize the scope of the conspiracy they have become involved in. Not just an ancient cult that exists on the periphery of civilization, but an organized structure that has infiltrated the very heart of local government, ready to protect its secrets at all costs. "I wonder," Morgan said thoughtfully, looking up at the towering cliffs above the road, "how many of those beautiful rockfalls that have killed tourists over the last few decades have really been accidental?" Federal Bureau of Investigation Office, Sacramento, September 28, 2010. Special Agent Teresa McLean, a 43-year-old telephone communications analyst, is presenting the results of a study of District Attorney Richard Stone's calls over the past 3 years. Graphs on the screen show a consistent pattern, at least 2 contacts a week with one caller, retired Ranger Garrett Finch. The frequency of calls increased significantly before each disappearance in the park area, McLean notes, pointing to peaks of activity, and also immediately after the discovery of the head cave. 16 calls in 48 hours is exceptionally high for normal professional contacts. Robert Haley and Layla Morgan scrutinized the dossier on Finch, 62-year-old ex-military, 27 years of National Park Service, respected wilderness survival expert, leading courses for rookie rangers, and, as it turns out, the last person in contact with 3 of the 5 missing climbers whose heads were identified in the cave. Finch gave them orientation briefings. Morgan flips through the pages of the report. Mandatory procedure for solo ascents. He also approved the routes, and he was also the first to report disappearances. "We can't just go in and arrest him," Haley rubs her inflamed eyes. "We have no direct evidence, only circumstantial connections, and, given the patronage of the DA's office, we'll get them to come to us." Morgan closes the folder with a decisive motion. "It's time to set the trap. The operation is being developed under the strictest secrecy. Only 5 people are privy to the details: Haley, Morgan, Agent McLean, neighboring county sheriff Marcus Johnson, and federal prosecutor Erica Ramirez, a longtime acquaintance of Morgan's from the academy. The other participants know only their immediate tasks. September 30th. A local newspaper leaks information. A key piece of evidence has been discovered in a cave, an ancient manuscript with embalming formulas and a list of cult members from the year 1870. The document is allegedly being kept in a sealed safe at the Mariposa police station until specialists from Washington arrive. "Everything has to look authentic," Morgan instructs the officers involved in the operation. "They're probably watching the precinct. Video cameras should capture the feds bringing in the special container. Security is tight, but with obvious weak spots for entry." That same night, at 2 hours and 17 minutes, the police station's alarm system detects an intrusion through the ventilation shaft. 3 men in black clothing and masks, armed with stun guns and canisters of soporific gas, break into the evidence room. They are met by 12 SWAT officers hiding in neighboring rooms. The detainees are Deputy Sheriff Alan Greer and 2 National Park Rangers, Stephen Hall and Michael Peterson. Men who have been trusted with the safety of park visitors and locals for decades. "We didn't expect to take a big fish on the first try," Haley later admits in an interview for an internal investigation. But the very fact that they took the bait proved that the conspiracy was real. The interrogation takes place at the Federal Detention Center in Sacramento, outside the jurisdiction of District Attorney Stone. For the first 12 hours, the detainees remain silent, demanding lawyers. Things change when Morgan shows Hall a surveillance photo. His daughter enters the county courthouse to meet with DA Stone. "He used your family as a guarantee of your silence," Morgan says quietly. "What do you think he'll do when he finds out the operation failed? Who will be the next vessel?" By the end of the second 24 hours, all 3 detainees testify in exchange for federal witness protection. Their confessions shock even seasoned FBI agents. The cult of the Guardians of the Heights existed long before Europeans came to North America. Initially, a secret society of shamans of the Miwok tribe, practicing rituals of harmonization with the spirits of the mountains. After colonization, the cult adapted, accepting individual white settlers who showed interest in local beliefs. "It's not just killing," Greer states in his testimony. "This is a sacred exchange. The mountains demand sacrifices to prevent disasters, landslides, earthquakes, forest fires. For every guardian accepted by a mountain, dozens of ordinary people's lives are saved." The embalming technique, passed down from generation to generation of initiates, allowed the heads of the victims to be preserved in a near-living state. According to the cult's beliefs, the souls of the chosen ones continued to exist in these heads, observing the world and serving as intermediaries between the human world and the elemental forces of the mountains. "We didn't force anyone," Peterson insists. "Each candidate had to come voluntarily. We only helped them see the truth, showed proof of the power of the mountains." Based on the confessions, a federal judge issues arrest warrants for 18 suspects, including District Attorney Stone. However, his office turns out to be empty. Stone disappeared hours before the operation, alerted by an unknown informant. The main attention of the investigation is focused on Garrett Finch. Special forces surround his remote cabin in the mountains at dawn on October 2nd. After 3 hours of fruitless negotiations, the decision is made to storm the place. Inside, Finch's body is discovered. He had managed to take poison, leaving a sealed envelope on the table with the inscription, "To Detective Haley, the truth about Corwin." James was not a victim in the traditional sense, Finch's letter reads. "He came to us on his own, interested in our practices, went through the first 2 levels of initiation. But then something changed. He started gathering information, documenting rituals, not as a believer, but as a researcher who planned to reveal our secret to the world." Finch describes how the cult's council of elders decided to turn the traitor into an eternal witness. A special embalming technique was reserved for those who had betrayed the Brotherhood, so that they would be eternally aware of their betrayal. Ordinary guardians find peace after death by becoming part of the mountain. Traitors remain conscious, trapped inside their heads. Corwin is now an eternal prisoner. He sees, hears, feels, but cannot move or speak. The final assault on the cult's secret hideout takes place on October 5th. A combined team of FBI agents, SWAT agents, and police officers, led by Haley and Morgan, penetrate the cave system, discovered by coordinates from the detainees' confessions. During the operation, 12 cult members are arrested, including high-ranking park administration officials, a local judge, and 3 respected city businessmen. Ancient manuscripts containing formulas for embalming compounds dating from the 16th to 17th centuries, and 3 freshly severed heads prepared for the ritual are discovered in an underground laboratory, young tourists who disappeared in the park the week before. Analysis of the composition used confirms its uniqueness and effectiveness. The embalming technique did indeed preserve tissue in a near-living state for decades. "We had hoped to expose the entire cult in one operation," Haley comments on the results at a press briefing. "But it's clear that many members managed to escape, dissolving into the general population. This is not the end of the investigation, but only the beginning." Elizabeth Corwin's fate remains one of the unsolved mysteries of the case. Her body was never found, despite an extensive search. When re-examining her room, detectives discover a newly painted cult symbol on the wall and a note written in her handwriting. "The mountains have called. I must be with James." The investigation into the Yosemite severed heads case, as journalists have dubbed it, continues to this day. New arrests occur every few months, but the cult's founders and its top hierarchs remain elusive. Richard Stone was spotted in Mexico, then Guatemala, but his trail is lost in the highlands of Peru. The epilogue of the investigation leaves more questions than answers. The cult, which has existed for centuries, has a much more extensive network than was initially uncovered. According to the FBI's analysis, it could potentially include hundreds of people across the country in various positions in the management of national parks and nature reserves. Notably, since the arrest of key members of the cult, strange natural phenomena have become more frequent in the Yosemite area. Unexplained rockfalls, sudden fogs enveloping mountain peaks for days, and uncharacteristic sound effects described by witnesses as moans coming from deep within the rocks. It's as if the mountains themselves are angry at the violation of an ancient pact between humans and the stone giants. Unofficial, illegal archaeological expeditions organized by enthusiasts in defiance of the park administration's prohibitions continue to find caves with embalmed heads in remote areas of Yosemite. Radiocarbon analysis of some of the finds shows that individual vessels are several centuries old, confirming the continuity of the practice since pre-colonial times. Robert Haley, who received a federal award for solving the case, admits in rare interviews, "Sometimes when I look at the mountains, I catch myself thinking, what if they really are alive? What if the cult was right and we've upset some ancient balance? That thought scares me more than anything I've seen in 30 years of police work."